He's the king of country, 70 million albums sold, 60 #1 hits, and a legacy that rewrote the rules of the genre. But behind the fame, George Strait was nearly broken by a tragedy that no parent should ever face. And it wasn't just the music that saved him. It was someone much closer than anyone realized. This is the untold story of George Strait, the heartbreak he kept hidden, and the son who quietly brought him back from the edge. George Strait wasn't born into fame. He was born into dust, work boots, and Texas heat. Growing up in the tiny town of Pearsall, George spent more time fixing fences and herding cattle than dreaming of standing on stage. His father, a math teacher and rancher, raised George and his brother after their parents separated. A quiet, no-excuses kind of upbringing that left its mark on George for life. Unlike many country legends, George didn't grow up strumming Hank Williams on a porch swing. In fact, he didn't care much for country music at all. He was more into rock bands like the Beatles and played in garage groups during high school. If you told his teenage self that he'd one day redefine country music, he might have laughed. Things shifted when he joined the Army in 1971 and was stationed in Hawaii. That's where he first picked up a guitar seriously. And something clicked. He started listening to Merle Haggard, George Jones, Bob Wills, and the roots of country began to grow deep. He joined a band on bass and started playing country music at military events, slowly realizing this was more than a hobby. But when George returned to Texas, even with a new fire for music, the industry didn't care. Nashville wasn't looking for a soft-spoken cowboy with a traditional sound. It was the era of polished, pop-driven country, and George's style was seen as too old school. One by one, every label turned him down. He played local gigs. He hustled. He recorded a few singles with a small-time label that went nowhere. And eventually, with bills piling up and no real shot at success, George had to make a choice. Keep chasing a dream that seemed out of reach, or take a job designing cattle pens to support his family. He chose the cattle pens. He told his band it was over. They were crushed, but he was serious. The dream was done, until Norma, his wife and high school sweetheart, pulled him aside and said 7 words that would change everything. "Give it one more year, George." So he did. And in 1981, that final chance paid off. A single record deal with MCA, just one song to prove himself. The track was Unwound. It shot to number 6 on the charts, and just like that, George Strait went from almost forgotten to a rising star. But just as the world began to hear his voice, tragedy would force him to go silent. By 1986, George Strait was a full-blown star. Chart-topping albums, sell-out tours, and awards were piling up faster than he could count. But behind the scenes, he was just a father, raising 2 kids with Norma, Jennifer and Bubba. Their lives looked picture-perfect, until one night, everything changed. Jennifer Strait was just 13 years old when she and a friend got into a car. It was a regular evening in Texas, nothing unusual, until the driver lost control. The car flipped violently, rolling off the road. Jennifer wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She was partially thrown from the car and died instantly. George was crushed. There's no other word for it. Fans expected him to say something, to appear on talk shows, maybe even release a tribute song. But George did none of that. He disappeared from public view. No interviews, no press, no statements. For over a year, he refused to talk about the accident. It wasn't a publicity moment. It was raw grief, lived in silence. Years later, he explained why. "I got even more private after I lost my daughter. That's when I really shut things down. I didn't feel like talking to anybody who wasn't close to me." He meant it. The media couldn't touch him. He stopped doing interviews, stopped engaging with fame. And yet, somehow, he didn't stop performing. He poured his pain into his music, quietly, powerfully, relentlessly. Between 1986 and 1989, while the world saw nothing but success, George was in mourning. He released 11 #1 singles in a row, a historic run. But each note carried the weight of someone he could never get back. The death of Jennifer changed him. It changed how he saw the industry. Fame no longer mattered. Chart positions were irrelevant. From that point on, George Strait made music on his own terms, or not at all. And while fans were singing along to every word, they didn't realize that behind the smooth voice was a man holding back tears, and someone waiting quietly in the wings who would one day help him heal. In the wake of his daughter's death, most people would have stopped, taken a break, faded quietly from the spotlight. But not George Strait. Instead, he did the opposite. He got to work. What followed was one of the most remarkable streaks in music history. Between 1986 and 1989, George released a wave of chart toppers that seemed unstoppable. Nobody in his right mind would have left her. Oceanfront Property, All My Exes Live in Texas, each one a hit, each one pushing his name deeper into country music legend status. He wasn't chasing pop trends. He wasn't dressing up his sound to fit the times. He was doing it his way, simple, heartfelt, unapologetically country. While others leaned into flashy production and crossover appeal, George stayed rooted. And it worked. Audiences connected with the honesty in his music, even if they didn't know the pain behind it. But here's the part fans didn't see. George was grieving the entire time. Behind every #1 single, behind every standing ovation, was a man carrying the weight of unimaginable loss. The stage became his therapy, the studio, his shelter. And while the world celebrated his success, George kept most of himself locked away, guarded, quiet, and focused only on what mattered. He didn't use tragedy as a marketing tool. There was no memoir, no interview tour, no emotional press conference. He simply kept going, head down, heart heavy, and songs pouring out with more soul than ever before. By the end of the 1980s, George had not only survived the most painful chapter of his life, he had somehow turned it into an artistic peak. His 1987 album Oceanfront Property became the first country album to debut at #1 on the Billboard country charts. He closed the decade by winning CMA's Entertainer of the Year and releasing a string of records that redefined what country music could be. But even with all the success, George was still missing something. Jennifer's absence left a space in the Strait family that could never be filled. But quietly, in the background, George's son Bubba was growing into someone who would eventually help his father heal in ways no award or chart position ever could. He didn't sing. He didn't chase fame. But Bubba Strait was about to become the most important collaborator of George's entire career. While the world watched George Strait dominate country music, his son Bubba was quietly living a very different kind of life. No red carpets, no headlines, no press chasing him. And that was exactly how the Strait family wanted it. George Harvey Strait Jr., nicknamed Bubba almost from birth, grew up far from the flashing lights of the music industry. George and Norma made a conscious choice to keep him out of the public eye. While his father was out touring the world, Bubba was at home in Texas, immersed in a world of cattle, rodeos, and ranch work. Even as a kid, Bubba took to ranch life like it was in his blood. While other kids were watching cartoons, he was riding horses. By middle school, he was already competing in junior rodeos, roping calves and pushing himself in ways that mirrored his father's quiet discipline. And just like George, Bubba didn't talk much about what he was doing. He just did it. When he got to Texas A&M University, he wasn't there as the son of a music legend. He was there as a cowboy. He joined the university's rodeo team and competed in team roping events across the state, earning respect not for who his father was, but for how hard he worked. People who knew him described him as humble, focused, and fiercely dedicated to the sport. But rodeo isn't without danger. During one event, Bubba suffered a serious accident with a rope loop that nearly severed his index finger, an injury that forced him to step back from competition for a while. It was a brutal moment for someone so committed to the cowboy lifestyle, But it didn't stop him. It just redirected him. And through it all, George was right there. When he wasn't touring, he and Bubba worked their ranch in South Texas together, riding, roping, raising cattle. George later said that some of the best memories of his life weren't made on stage or in studios. They were made in dusty pastures, watching his son grow into a man. "It's the greatest feeling in the world to watch my son win a roping, or even to just watch him compete," George once said. "I'm way more nervous when I'm watching him than I ever was performing myself." But Bubba wasn't just following in his father's boot prints. He was slowly carving his own path, and soon, that path would circle back toward music in a way that surprised even George. The cowboy life was in Bubba's blood, but what he did next would change the course of his father's career forever. Turns out, Bubba had more than ranching and rodeo in him. He had music, not the kind that craved the spotlight, but something more personal. He picked up a guitar, started writing, and slowly began feeding lyrics to someone he trusted more than anyone: his father. At first it was just an experiment, but the results were undeniable. Bubba co-wrote "Living for the Night," a song so raw and emotional it felt like a page out of George's own diary. Fans noticed the shift. It wasn't just another George Strait hit. It had depth, pain, heart. That song marked the beginning of a new phase in George's music. Bubba would go on to co-write songs for 4 of his dad's albums, helping shape the sound of a legend in his later years. Tracks like "Out of Sight," "Out of Mind," and "Here for a Good Time" weren't just hits. They were collaborations between a father and the son who pulled him back into songwriting. George even admitted it. "Bubba really got me back into writing." Watching him grow into it, that's been the real joy. And then, after years of working in the background, Bubba finally stepped into the spotlight, in front of 100,000 screaming fans. For years, Bubba had been the quiet force behind some of George Strait's most personal songs. But in 2014, he did something no one saw coming. During the final stop of George's Cowboy Rides Away tour, an arena packed with over 100,000 fans in Arlington, Texas, Bubba stepped on stage beside his father. Together, they performed "Arkansas Dave," a song Bubba wrote himself. No flash, no over-the-top theatrics, just 2 generations of Straits sharing a story with a stadium full of fans who suddenly realized this wasn't just George's farewell. It was a passing of the torch. It was the most intimate moment in one of the biggest concerts in country music history. And for a man who rarely let the world into his personal life, this was as close as it gets. The crowd didn't just cheer, they connected. Because in that moment, George Strait wasn't just a country legend. He was a father, standing next to a son who had quietly become his creative partner. And as that chapter closed, a new generation of Straits was already starting to write the next one. These days, George might not be touring like he once did, but the Strait name is far from fading. Bubba, now a devoted husband and father of 2, has continued to write songs alongside his dad while raising a family of his own. His wife, Tamara, once an NBA dancer, now a realtor, often shares glimpses of their quiet Texas life: rodeos, horses, and time spent with their kids, George Harvey Strait III and Jillian Louise. And yes, even the grandkids are already stepping into the spotlight. George III, Harvey, joined his grandpa on stage at the Houston Rodeo to sing God and Country music, while Jillian has been caught singing around the house. George has said it himself: "Whatever they want to do, I'll support them." But that's the beauty of the Strait family. They don't chase fame. They live their lives with purpose, privacy, and passion. From heartbreak to healing, ranches to recording studios, the Strait legacy isn't just about music. It's about resilience, roots, and riding through life with the people who matter most. And while the spotlight may fade, the legend, and the family behind it, keeps on shining. George Strait didn't become the king of country just by topping charts. He earned that title by standing tall through heartbreak, staying true to who he was, and letting the music speak louder than the fame ever could. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase headlines. And when life hit him, with the kind of pain most people don't recover from, he didn't quit. He got quieter and better. Behind every #1 hit was a man still healing, still holding his family close, and still chasing the kind of life that doesn't need applause. And in the end, it was never just about the music. It was about love, loss, and the unexpected bond between a father and son that helped both of them find their voices together. George Strait built a legacy not just of hits, but of heart. And if there's one thing his story proves, it's this. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that don't speak the loudest. They just never stop singing.